Good morning, church. Everybody should be all rested up today. You've had an extra hour of sleep, so you shouldn't fall asleep here today. I wish we could have an extra hour of sleep every weekend. How about it, right? We're privileged today to have one of our new elders come up and speak to us, Craig Perrell, Dr. Craig Perrell. He's been a pastor. He's served at Cornerstone Baptist. He's been working at Florida Baptist Children's Home for several years. And we're blessed as a church to have Craig and Renee and their wonderful family as part of our church family. And Craig's going to come and share God's word with us. God bless you. We're in store for a great, great blessing from God's word today. Brother Craig, thank you.
Yay! There's been a few people that said, "Oh, we're so excited. I don't know why." Just kidding. It is an honor. It is an honor to come up here and have a chance to open God's Word and share with all of you, and that's what we're going to do, open God's Word and hope to hear from Him. I'm a bit rusty. I'm sure it's been a while, probably a decade since I've done this, but some of you could say, "Oh, it's been more than a decade for me," right? Or never. That's right. And you'd like to keep it that way, right? But, you know, the elders got together, and I drew the short straw, so here I am, right? But just so you're aware, if Pastor Mike is not back next week, the phone calls are coming out, so you better not answer your phone, right? Fuel, voicemail, right? Just kidding. Just kidding. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 32, continuing on in our story. And we're going to try and cruise through this as quickly as we can. There's a lot to cover. And we have a special treat at the end. We have a special story that we want you to hear that comes from this text. So Genesis 32, if you're there, you can follow along. I'm going to read it first, and then we'll go back through and highlight some things and give you some takeaways. All right, so Genesis 32, this is the story. There's more to this chapter, but this is the chapter that's known for Jacob wrestling with God, with a man. Come to find out it's God. All right, here we go. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good.' I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, 'I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.' So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants. Every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me, and place a space between drove and drove." He instructed the first, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you?' Then you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us.' He likewise instructed the second and the third, and all who follow the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, 'Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he thought, I may appease him with a present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.' So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, 'Let me go, for the day is broken.' But Jacob said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' And he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' Then he said, 'Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked him, 'Please tell me your name.' But he said, 'Why is it that you ask my name?' And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, 'For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered.' The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh." This is in a greater story here that we see chapter 32. Of course, this is narrative in Genesis. This is story. And as it was originally written, we didn't have nice chapters and verses breaking it all up, right? It was just one story, one big story, actually. And this story, the context of this goes back to chapter 28 at the least. And we need to go back there for just a minute and take a look at chapter 28 at what God said to Jacob back then, because it gives us a picture of what's going on here in chapter 32. So permit me, I have all these notes, and I have my Bible. We moved. I had an NIV Bible, but I like the ESV. It's on my phone, so sorry to read off my phone, but I have my Bible up here. Okay. So try and shuffle it all, right? So Genesis 28, this is important. This is when Jacob is sent away. Starting in verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. So he's leaving Canaan, right? Leaving what is the promised land and heading out northeast, if you will. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up on a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord, Yahweh, shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a full tenth to you. Excuse me, that's a lot of reading. A lot of text there. Some key points that we see here, and I'd like to give you the takeaways right up front, because I think it's not just here in our passage, but we've seen it throughout, and we'll see it in future story scenes as well, if you will. The first one is this, that you are not alone. You and I are not alone. And I think Jacob went through this as well. And what I find interesting here is we look at 28, and we'll go back in a minute into 32. But God said in verse 15, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. That is a key to our text coming up in 32, and we'll see that in just a minute. And of course, Jacob is learning the faith of his grandfather and learning the faith of his father. And their God is becoming his God. And he's in this process of that, and of course makes this vow and says, okay, God, if you will bring me back safely, if you will bring me back in peace to this place, then I will put my complete trust in you and you will be my God. But I think there are times, and it's evident when we go through the story, that there are times when he probably doubted that. And there may be times for us when we doubt that as well. But if you are a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, Scripture says that you have God's Spirit residing within you, and God is with you. You are never alone. And there may be times, and I've had these times as well, when it feels like you're alone. And you have the weight of some responsibility, or there's some circumstance that's going on, and that can be very crushing, humanly speaking. And sometimes we can put that on ourselves. You know, it's really an elementary thing to say, you know, it's elementary truth. You're not alone, God is with you, right? That's kind of easy to hear, you know, and perceive. It's much harder to live out the reality of that on a day-to-day basis when we bump into those struggles, when we bear the weight of that responsibility that no one else at our work or in our family is bearing. It's just us. And we can quickly get to that place where we think, you know, it's just me. It's only me. But it's not. It's really you and God. You're not alone. The second thing here is that God is always at work. And we see this a little more implied through the text. But we know that God has been at work in Jacob's life and with him living with Laban, right? And we heard last week about his issues there with Laban and how Laban was deceptive to him with his daughters. He was deceptive with his pay, with changing his wages, deceptive about the flocks. And Jacob has to strive through all of this. But God is at work in the midst of all of that. Let's go back to 32 and just start walking through this if we can quickly. And I like how these Old Testament stories give us memory hooks, if you will. There's kind of threads that run through them. There are different words or word plays that are here that the author gives us, different things so that we might remember. And sometimes we have to remember, you know, way back, they didn't have the scriptures all written down. They primarily heard them. So how were they hearing these things? So we'll start off in the first 8 verses here and pick up on some of those and kind of compare what's going on here. It says, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Now, right away we see that the angels of God here compared to the angels of God that were ascending and descending on that staircase. So remember, Jacob has gone away. He's been away for probably some 20 years, and now he's coming back. When he left, God met him in a dream, unexpectedly had this dream of these angels ascending and descending on the staircase. Now he's coming back. And as he's coming into the land or approaching the land, now he unexpectedly meets these angels, right? And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means two camps, which is another key here in our text. We know that Jacob has already dealt with one camp. He had his camp and Laban's camp. And, of course, he prevailed there. Now he's coming into the land, and he sees this encampment of God and these angels. So now there's two camps here. And then further on, of course, we'll find out about his camp compared to his brother Esau's camp. So there's all these camps that we see as well. And Jacob had sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, thus shall you say to Esau. So he sent this message on, right, and told Esau, this is all that I have that I'm bringing back really to you. And he sent the message, it says in verse 5, so that he might find favor in his sight, or grace in his sight, which of course should draw our mind back to the one who did find favor or grace in the eyes of the Lord, right? That was Noah. Some of you are afraid to say it. So Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Right here, Jacob is seeking to find grace in the eyes of his brother. And the messengers returned and came to him and said, yes, your brother is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Now, in the text, there are 400 men coming to meet him. That coming to meet him could be taken two different ways. It could be taken in a military sense. They're coming to meet him and to do him harm. But it could also be taken a little more ambiguously. They're just coming to meet him, and there's no ill will there. So the text doesn't say, but Jacob takes it to mean that they're coming to do him harm. So his brother is coming, so of course he's afraid. It says in verse 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So what does he do? He divides the people who are with him into two camps. So here again we see this idea of these camps running through the passage. Back in Genesis 28, Jacob was fearful when he saw the angels of God in the dream. Here he sees the encampment of God, and there's no expression of fear. However, when he finds out about his brother, he's fearful. The text really does not, as it unfolds, leave Jacob in the best light, because he's still trying to manipulate the situation and still trying to deceive, if you will. So he divides up all his possessions and his family into two camps. And he says, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that's left will escape. So at least he'll have some heritage, right? And then we have a prayer of Jacob, the first recorded prayer of Jacob. And prayers are wonderful in the scriptures. If you ever want to do a great study, just look up the different prayers of God's people that have been prayed in the scriptures. And this one is a good one to study as well. He said, O God of my father O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Yahweh, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. So here we see, when we're thinking about prayer, that when we pray, we're talking to a personal God. You know, he again is praying to his grandfather's God and his father's God, and he could have left it at that. But again, I see in this text, and I see through the storyline, that Yahweh is becoming Jacob's God. And he is trying to figure that out. And of course, it's been a while, right, since he has had these kind of encounters. And even back when Laban came and met him, because he left his father-in-law and took all his family, right, and escaped, right, and didn't receive any kind of blessing or farewell from his father-in-law. And he could have done that, but he didn't. He sort of tricked him, right, because he didn't want him to do him any harm. So now here he's finally praying to God, to Yahweh, the personal God. And he says, you said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. So it's as if Jacob's saying, I'm doing exactly what you said to do. Remember, you're the one that said to do this. Here I am. I'm following. So for you and I, when we pray, it's important that we remember that we are talking to a personal God. It's easy for us, to kind of slip into that pattern, right? Where we come to the Lord, maybe more like an appeal, that you would find in court, right? And we can even reason with God and talk to him about, how good we are, how bad we are, or whatever, or, why he should this, that, or the other. But what God is really interested in is that personal relationship with us. So in prayer, when we come to God, we need to remember that he is our Yahweh. The next verse says, I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown. God had been such a blessing to him, had given him so much, and that's been recounted in the previous story as well. And he says, for with only my staff alone I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. It is important that when we pray, we acknowledge our humble position before God. And he did here, and I think Jacob really recognized his need for God's help. And in the next verse, he clearly states that, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. Here he gives his petition, which is important for us to remember as well, that we can come boldly. It says in Hebrews that we can come boldly before the throne of grace and seek help to find mercy and grace in time of need. So we can do that. We can come just like Jacob did and express our petitions to God. And then I love verse 12, why he can pray this kind of prayer. He says, but you said, Yahweh, you're the one that gave me this promise. I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he recounts what God has already promised him. Really, when we come to the Lord in prayer, that's really the only ammunition that we have, right? We really can't come to him saying, well, I've been pretty good for about a week now, that doesn't really cut it, Well, I did go to church and I did tithe and I'm signed up next week to do the next message, right? You're not. But we can't come to God like that, right? It doesn't work that way. But we can recount God's promises. There are hundreds of promises in the Word that you can go to in the Scriptures and rehearse those and communicate those back to God. That's his word, that's his promise to us. And we can bank on that. We can count on that, right? He will never let us down. So Jacob's prayer comes to a close, and then he divides out his flocks for a present. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had, he took a present or a gift, which is really in the Hebrew a minha. So we have the two camps, Mahanaim, and now from the two camps, from the Mahanaim, come a minha, come a gift, a present for his brother. And of course, we have all of these lists of animals that he is offering to his brother as a gift. Really hundreds. I just can't imagine the sight, what that looked like, having all those flocks, those herds coming toward Esau. And that was just a portion of. We're not told how much of a portion that was. Was it a tenth? Was it a greater portion? We don't know. But he's offering a gift to his brother. And he's sending them on ahead of him and instructing all of his herdsmen to say, these all are yours. They're all a present from Jacob. They are all for you, Esau. We are offering them to you. And Jacob is behind us. In our text here in verse 20 and 21, it says, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he thought I may appease him, really appease his face, with a present that goes before his face. And afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept or lift up my face. So we have this term used 5 times in the Hebrew of his face. And it's almost as if the author is saying, Jacob is putting himself at the rear. The last thing he wants to do right now is see his brother face to face. And of course, this is a clue for what's coming with his wrestling with God. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. And then we come to the wrestling with God. And again, all through this, God has been with Jacob. He has not been alone, right? And God is at work and has been at work the whole time. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. Verse 24. Now, yes, I get it. It was just him, right? There was no one else there in his family. He had sent them all on ahead of him. And you could say, in some respects, this was his effort to appease his brother and save his own life, right? Even if it cost the life of all of his family. And a significant event happens here. It says, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. And the author gives us these words as a word play. It says, God wrestled Yaabek with Jacob, Yaakov, by the Jabbok, Yabok. So these Hebrew terms are all tied together, that God wrestled with Jacob by the Jabbok. Some have tried to take this text and say, well, it wasn't really that. It wasn't really God wrestling with Jacob in that place. But the text is very clear that he did. Now, this is selective revelation, like all of God's word is, because I have so many questions, as you probably do, about this text, right? Like, what in the world? What did this look like? Can you imagine a wrestling match that went on through the night? Some of you probably have wrestled or done other sports and know how grueling that can be, to give up minutes and minutes in the battle, right? And this went on for quite a while. But we know that Jacob is no slouch, right? He's a beast. He's the one that rolled the stone away from the well, right? So now he comes back and he wrestles with this man. And he's winning, just as he had, albeit deceptively, with his brother and with his father and with Laban, with everyone else in his life. He's had to strive. He's had to wrestle. And he has prevailed, but that's been his whole life. That's been his character, is someone who wrestles, someone who fights, someone who's deceptive. He does whatever he can to get his way. And we even see it through this text. So now this man comes to him and wrestles with him. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, again, Jacob was winning this battle, whatever it looked like, right? When he saw that he could not prevail against him, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Now, that word could mean touched, or it could mean something a little more forceful. But knowing what's coming and who this really was, it could have been just that, right? Boop. And that's it. Jacob's done, right? And his hip socket is now put out. I imagine that's very, very painful. I would not want to go through that. But what's amazing is Jacob hangs on. He continues to hold on to this man and won't let him go. And I think at this point he probably realizes who this really is. This is what we would call a theophany, or some would say a Christophany. This is a physical form of God in the flesh. God has come down in this form of a man and has been wrestling with Jacob. And there's a point to all of this wrestling. He says, let me go, for the day is broken. Okay, it's morning's coming, the light's coming, let me go. And Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. It's as if Jacob is finally realizing what he has needed all this time is not man's approval, not man's blessing, not to have success fighting with all of these other people in his life. He really needs the blessing of God. And he says, I won't let you go until you bless me. And the man says to him, what is your name? And he says, as if in an admission of character, my name is Jacob. The man knew, of course, who he was. He didn't have to ask, right? But he wanted Jacob to admit who he was. Not just his name, but what his character was, what his life was like up until that point. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob. And in the Hebrew, that no longer shall be called refers to a spiritual metamorphosis. There's a spiritual change that's going on here with this name change. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, meaning he strives or struggles with God. Some have said that the literal meaning is God strives or God rules. But the man continues, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. You have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. So Jacob says, well, please tell me your name. And he says, that doesn't matter, right? Why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him, which is really just a term for farewell. He said goodbye to him. Our blessing really comes from verse 28. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, face of God, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. So Jacob was all worried, right, coming into this scene about deliverance, about being delivered, but not being delivered from God, but being delivered from his brother. And yet God had given him a promise that it appears that he has forgotten, that God would be with him and would bless him, right, and would never leave him until the promise was fulfilled. And God comes to him now and says, listen, you're not going to be called Jacob anymore. You're going to be called Israel. For you have wrestled with me, you have wrestled with men, and you have won. You're a winner. And that is a picture of what is to come, that when he meets his brother, he will be delivered from that as well. I want to end our time right there and ask Jamie Lamont to come up. He is a friend, a special friend to my family. He is a teacher and a coach and has taught 3 of my 4 children and has probably coached them a little bit too, and has mentored my son a little bit in coaching. He has a special story, testimony that relates to this verse. So, brother, take it away.
Good morning. I don't know a lot of you by face, but I am glad to be able to share a little bit with you. Genesis 32:21 is a huge verse in my family. They're not here this service. They're going to come second service. Maybe you'll be able to see them in between. But to try and go this quickly, in the Christmas of 2009, my wife and I kind of looked at each other and both said, let's adopt a child. We both, just in our own kind of had this ethereal, maybe we'll adopt someday feel. We had 3 healthy biological kids. No real reason to do this, but decided that this was something that we were going to try and do. And I don't know if anybody's ever gone through adoption or talked to people who have gone through adoption, but it's a pretty wide open deal. You know, the first thing you're figuring out is where you're going to adopt. The world's a pretty big place, lots of kids, and you're going to adopt from America. If not from America, there's a lot of countries. So we started to kind of work through that process, and pretty quickly it became clear to us that we're going to be adopting from overseas. Okay, so now which country? And you start to look into it. Some countries we weren't allowed to adopt to because we were too old, some because we didn't have enough money, some because we already had kids. And you're trying to kind of figure this whole thing out. And we're realizing that God is with us. God is leading us. We're not alone in this. And another thing that we learned is that a few years back, adoption kind of became corrupt. You had some countries overseas where people had realized that there were people coming to adopt kids, and they figured out that was a way for them to get some money. And some kids were being adopted that should not be adopted. And so basically a lot of the world's countries got together and said, we need to set up some rules for this to protect these children. It's called the Hague Convention. And so we started looking into this, and we were realizing, okay, well, maybe we're not going to do this country, or we're not going to do this one. And anyways, long story short, we stumbled on the country of Zambia. It's in southern Africa, down near Victoria Falls, if you ever heard of Victoria Falls. So anyways, one of the things that stood out to Zambia was Zambia had decided they were not going to follow those rules that were all set up. Basically what would happen is if you wanted to adopt a child from, say, China or Nicaragua or Kenya or Ethiopia, you would follow these rules. Well, rules mean paperwork mean lawyers mean money, and so it became a very expensive kind of a deal, and Zambia said, we're not going to do that. but we're going to protect the kids in Zambia by basically saying, if you want to adopt a child from here, you're going to live here for a month or 2 or 3 months and foster the child, and we're going to watch you. We're going to eyeball you and see if you're in here doing this for the right reason. Well, that appealed to us, not because, since there's no lawyers, no Hague Convention, no rules, no paperwork, it was much cheaper. And it wasn't that we were looking for the easy way out, but we said, well, if we're not paying money for lawyers and fees, let's take our kids. And since my wife and I are both teachers, we're like, we can afford over the summer to go live in a country for a month or 2 months. Most of us can't give up our job for a month or 2, but as teachers, we don't do stuff in the summer as much. And so we said Zambia might be perfect for us. We can spend the money on plane tickets. We can go live there. We can be there over the summer. And we can follow the rules that they want us to follow. So anyways, we started going through the process. And again, I don't know if any of you know much about adoption, but you still have to do a lot of paperwork and a lot of things. And I don't have time to explain to this in detail, but God opened every door in a way that only he could, and it was very, very obvious to us. Just imagine how long you wait at the DMV to get your driver's license. Okay, do that like times 10. Okay, and that's what we had to get done. And we started in January, and we were paper ready in May. And anybody who's gone through this that we talk to, their jaw goes, because that never, ever happens. So anyways, now we're ready. We know where we're going. We're going to Zambia. So we're working through this place called the House of Moses. They do not like to refer themselves as an orphanage because not all kids that come there were there to be adopted. Some were there because their family needed them to kind of give them a secure place for a while. Some were in transition from family to another family member. So this organization, the House of Moses, connected to a place called Alliance for Children. This American lady named Sandra had kind of got it up and running. So we fly, take our kids. Our kids were 7, 5, and 3. Zeke, Rain, and Addie. Addie, my 3-year-old, we're on Ethiopian Airlines. And imagine this, we're flying over there, this is hours and hours of a flight, and lunch shows up, and they put it in front of her. It is a plate of cold rice with raw salmon across it, like a garnish. And I can remember Addie just looking at me like, what do I do with this? I don't know what you do with this. I was hoping, maybe we can get some peanuts or something. So it was an interesting trip. We get there, hours and hours and hours. We get off the plane. We get in a taxi. We go straight to the House of Moses. Now, one of the big pieces of this that we never quite had a grasp on was what it was going to look like when we were there. Again, lots of details that I don't have time to go through. But we were led to believe that they were choosing the child that we were going to adopt. That there's going to be a lot of times they use the word referral, that we would show up and they would say, here's your child, you're off and running. So we get there, and Sandra comes out, and she's going, oh, it's so good to see you, so wonderful. Now get in there and pick out your child. Like we were shopping kind of a deal. And that was a stiff arm to the chest to us. And we're like, whoa, we couldn't even comprehend that. In this whole process, we had basically decided that, we have a boy and 2 girls. Let's balance the teams here. Let's get another boy. That's kind of what we decided. And we didn't want to insert anybody into the batting lineup. We were going to go to the bottom to not mess up the ages. So basically, we were looking for a boy under 2. And again, this is kind of what you have to do in order to create the paperwork. You have to make some decisions, and you have to say, this is what we're going to do, and the government then says, okay, go do that. If you do something different, we need to pay attention a little bit more to your changes. So we said boy under 2. So we go into this room. In this room, there's like 20 toddlers. The first thing that hits you is the smell, because you can't change a diaper every time it needs changing when you've got like 20 kids. So you just do it like every 3 hours or whatever. They're sitting there, they've just eaten. They kind of look up at us when we walk in. We've got these 3 little blonde kids coming in. We looked very different, obviously. And so you just go in and you just sit down on the floor. You pick up a kid and you put him on your lap and it squishes. And you're like, what was that? And then you're like, nah, I don't really care. And then you just start playing. My 7-year-old Zeke was incredible. He'd pick up the kids and airplane them around the room. My daughter Raina's this beautiful, wonderful spirit. She'd sit and read to them. And Addie, it was like, hey, 20 other kids, and so she just played. And so we did that, and we played. And the next day we went back and we played. And the next day we went back. So that was our thing. Well, of those 20 or so kids, it was split in the middle. It was 10 or 11 boys, 10 or 11 girls. Of those boys, only 5 of them were considered in our adoptable frame, like boy 2 and under, able to be adopted. Like some of the boys were under 2, but they were, maybe just in transition, or their paperwork, they were not, officially ready to be adopted. So not every boy in there was a boy that we could choose. And more interesting, of those 5, one of them, a boy named Elijah, after the first day went into quarantine. My wife always gets this right and I always get it wrong. I think he went in with measles. So the next day we go back and we're like, where's Elijah? No, he has got measles. So there's a room where he's in quarantine. So now there's 4. So there's 4 kids, boys that we can adopt. And our mission is to find them. And so, again, we weren't ready for this. So what do? How do you choose? And God is with us. And we're thinking that, there's going to be a ray of light that's going to shine on the child's head. And it's going to be that one. Or we're going to pick up the child and they're going to go, Daddy. And we're going to go, oh, you knew me. And, there's going to be some magical moment. Well, that wasn't the case. And so we're in this room and we're playing with the kids and we're having fun. And we're like, let's try and take one of the kids out of the toddler's room. They have like a little grassy area. Let's go out in the grassy area and see if maybe we can make some sort of connection. So we would kind of take the kids one at a time. There's 4, so we'd take one of them out. Well, as soon as you took them out of the room, they were out of their comfort zone, away from their friends, and it was nothing. I mean, we were hoping that was going to create the magical moment. There wasn't a moment at all. I mean, all the fun we were having in the room when they get out there, it was just hard for them, and I totally get it and totally understand it. But that wasn't going to make any magical moments. And so by about day 3, we're really kind of stumped. We're not certain what God's doing, how he's leading. And so we were out there on one particular day, and we'd had one of these young boys, and we're kind of trying to just have fun and play with them, and they're playing with our kids. And my wife, Mandy, takes this boy, takes him back in the room, and all the kids are knocked out asleep, except one little boy, Jacob. And Jacob's there, and he's just kind of standing there, sees her come in, and he does this. Like, hey, I'll go play. Well, Jacob was over 2 when you look on the list, so he doesn't fit our 5, now 4 kids that we could adopt. But she's like, he wants to go and play. Let's spend some time. So we take him out there, and he's out in the field or the grass, and we're kind of playing around. And my wife's mom instinct starts kicking in. Like, guys, we have no clue about the mom instinct. Our instinct is for, like, food and, TV or whatever. Like, they've got skills that we have no understanding of, like the spidey sense or something. And so she starts to wonder. So she starts checking for teeth. Women, you kind of know what we're saying. She's trying to age this kid. She's looking around, trying to feed this. And so eventually she's like, I wonder. And so she goes up to Nurse Irene. Nurse Irene was the main nurse. She kind of knew everybody. She knew the status. She goes, Irene, how old is Jacob? And she looks at Manny and says, we don't know. He came to us. It was his whole story, his whole backstory is a mystery. I want to be super sensitive to that because it's my son's story, but it's a mystery. And so they don't really know how old he was. And she basically said, we don't know. And so then we went to Sandra and we were like, what do we do about this? And she goes, well, you're going to give him his birthday. So he's as old as you decide because he doesn't have a birthday. When you come from a developing country where life and death is just kind of a different deal in America, what does paper mean? There's no little leagues. You don't got to prove somebody's age. And so there's no birth certificate, death certificate. That's not something they need. So he had no age. He had the age they gave him. So then basically we're back to 5 because he has now become adoptable. So very quickly it came down to us looking and going, let me check my watch because I'm trying to be sensitive to your time. There's probably some moms in here like, no, keep going. It came down to 2 kids. There's a child named Gift and then Jacob. Now, I don't know if you're processing with me at this point, but it was actually easier when it was 5. Now it's down to 2, and so now what's your decision? it's not about who you choose, it's who you don't choose. And that was, I'm starting to kind of, I'm the opposite of Nathan usually. Like, Nathan is a very sensitive, emotional, powerful guy, which is why the music he writes is so powerful. I don't cry for anything except Old Yeller getting shot. But yeah, that was really, 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 really hard. And we prayed about it, and we're trying to figure out what we're doing. And my wife is an amazing lady and let's just say, slow decision maker. She wants to be thorough. And I knew that this was going to be way harder. I'm kind of like Peter, ready, shoot, aim. You want me to come out of the boat? I'm in the water before thinking about, should I get out of the boat? And she's just different. And I knew this was going to be very hard for her, but I also knew she was going to be the lead here. And so I went to her and I said, you've got to be kind of the focal point of this decision. I knew what I felt. And we described our decision as a microscopic lean from one child to the other. 50.0001%, whatever that is. And so we decided we're going to adopt Jacob, which set in motion a lot of things which were very difficult to go through in terms of now social workers are involved. And these social workers did not necessarily have the best interest of us and our child. It was in a system that did have overall some corruption. And so it made things difficult, is probably the best way to say it. But we had decided that we were going to adopt Jacob. And one of the things that we had learned as we were studying adoption way back when was how adoption is a past tense. Like, you're adopted, and then no more is that, like, that's no longer the term. Like, we never refer to our son as our adopted son. He's our son. He's only our son. He will only ever be our son, and there's nothing that could ever change that, which spiritually is pretty important, because I don't know if you've ever recognized that the Bible tells us that you are adopted by Christ, and that can never be revoked. That can never change. So anyways, we had made this decision that we were going to adopt Jacob, and so that's what we were going to do. And we were going to trust God to walk with us and to make that happen. And so we're doing this, and we're making our way through it. Now, let me jump out of this for a minute. We had been keeping a blog, and I don't know if the blog pictures are somewhat available, but we had wanted people back in America to kind of know what we were doing. We had some people in our church, some friends who'd kind of help support us. And so we were trying to keep them abreast of what was going on, but it wasn't very easy. I was basically able to talk the lady where we were staying into giving me about an hour of her internet time and to pay her money to jump on the laptop, sign in with a quick little note about what we were doing, and post some pictures. But as part of the kind of rules, you're not supposed to post pictures of kids in these type of homes. There's huge ramifications, legally and protecting the children. So we were just putting pictures of us like running around Zambia, at the marketplace, climbing trees, whatever. But we were keeping everybody aware, and they could actually comment. And so we could put the blog post on, and then a couple days later we could see their comments. And so that's all going on. So we get to the final, we have our court date. We go get a birth certificate. We get a visa. We're working on a passport, doing all these things. And we finally get to the day where we're adopting Jacob. And it's going to be official. And so we're thinking about his name. And what we had decided well before this whole thing had gotten moving is when it came time to name our son, we were not going to go in and erase his past. We didn't want to go in and go, well, we've got these good names that we got out of these, cool books that we read, or our family name or anything. The child has a name. That's the child's name. That's part of his past. But what we were learning through Irene was that Jacob was not his name. That was the name he was given at the house of Moses. And so we felt like there was something unusual happening here. And so we asked Nurse Irene, we said, was there a nickname? Was there any connection? Was there anything that you had with Jacob? And she says, oh, I used to lovingly call him Jeb, kind of like a baby nickname. Jeb is what she would say. He came in not in a great condition, and Irene kind of, nursed him into health. And so we love that. That's a name that's connected to his past, Jeb. But it was the other piece to this that really mattered. And any of you maybe you've jumped ahead and you've started to figure out where this is going. Genesis 32:21. We decided that we were going to change his name from Jacob to Israel. Because Jeb, born in conditions that were difficult, has fought with the world. I mean, there's an unhappy moment to this story. Elijah, one of the 5 that went into quarantine, we found out about 6 months after going home that he died from malaria. And so you just think of God's hand and his providence and the mystery that it is, but he may have been the child that we adopted and took home, but he wasn't. And so he died a few months later. And Jeb struggled through all of those conditions, and he had survived, and he had this, kind of will to move forward, and God was working alongside of him. And we saw Genesis 32:21 in our son and believed wholeheartedly, convincingly, that was going to be his name, Jeb, Israel, Lamont. And, the pictures, I don't know if they scrolled through, but every one of those pictures was the picture that we posted on the day we were allowed to say, this is who we're adopting. And there's a picture of, that's us now. There's a picture of Jeb with with me, Subway in the background, of course. Everywhere you go, there's a Subway. And then that's my wife, and that's my son, Zeke. That's my daughter, Raina. And that's my daughter, Addie. And so we announced to the world, through the blog, his name. And we told that story, that his new name was going to be Jeb Israel Lamont. And I guess kind of the last little note that goes with this is my father had grown up in the church his whole life. I grew up in the church my whole life, but I was not a Christian until I was in college. We went to a very dead spiritual church. I don't ever remember hearing sermons. The pastor would just get up and read a verse and then give you his opinion on the world. And we had some very sweet Sunday school teachers, but everything kind of went over my head till college. I had an older brother who struggled with life in a lot of ways, and he became a Christian as an adult. He was probably the first Christian in my family of the 6 of us. I became a Christian in college. Shortly after it, my father became a Christian. Went to a thing called Curcio, which kind of opened his eyes to the Lord. Anyways, ever since that time, he'd been a very faithful Bible study guy. There's a little magazine that he would get called Encounter with God, and it was just like daily Bible study. And you would look at his Bible, and then it would be highlighted and underlined. And he'd basically said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right. And he was very focused. So on that blog post, on the day we announced Jeb's name, adoption to the world, if you look in the comments, my dad said, today's Bible study, and he names the book, Encounter with God, names the author. He said, today's verse was Genesis 32:21, and I quote, and he quoted, Jacob's name is going to be changed to Israel. And he basically confirmed for us, I still get chills when I think about that moment, that God was with us every step of that way. And even more than that, God was with Jeb every step of the way. And so, I don't, kind of what Craig was saying, this hits differently with people because of where your station in life is right now. Different ages, different families, but we're all always looking to know if God is with us. And my testimony in the verses that we are reading today is that he is absolutely always with us in a way that overwhelms any of your doubts or your fears or your limitations. And he will confirm those things to us, especially when we reach out in faith and walk in that path. So I thank you for letting me share the story. The one thing that I asked Jeb's permission, I was like, Jeb, can we share your story? And he says, yes, just don't make me go up there. So if you ever see us around, he's a really, really nice kid. He would love to talk to you, etc. But he's a 13-year-old boy, so don't expect a lot. It kind of goes, on you, just kind of like you did in the yard. So anyways, that's our story.
Let me pray us out. Father in heaven, we just are so grateful to look into your word today and be reminded of this truth.